2. Welcome back. WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST. We are Baltimore Positive. We are at Lexington Market at Faidley Seafood. Be back next week in Catonsville at State Fair, as well as at Jennings, where I'm going to have a Jennings burger. Right now we have Congressman John Sarbanes joining us here, and we were talking about transportation and food deserts and all that sort of stuff here. We didn't talk about your Baltimore background, and I know, Don, we usually do that in segment 1, but impeachment stuff we got going.
Well, we always like to ask Congressman. Nestor, you used the word in the first segment. You said to the congressman, you were born and bred to do this. When we talk to folks, all the different leaders, whether they're community leaders, elected leaders, and they come on, we say, when you look back, when you reflect on your background, on growing up in the city, growing up, and we'll talk about your dad and the role he played in a very historical political moment. But when you look back, what were the lessons? Who were the people involved in helping you become who you are? What do you take away from your upbringing?
Well, for starters, I grew up in Bolton Hill. I was born on Park Avenue in Bolton Hill, and then we moved to Bolton Street, 1700 block of Bolton Street.
Good Chinese food down the street, didn't you?
What's that?
Park Avenue. You had good Chinese food down the street.
Exactly.
You did.
And then I went to Mount Royal Elementary School number 66, which is still there. We used to walk to school. So, I got the feeling of what it means to grow up in the city. That was a great school that we went to back in the day, and it kind of gets into you. It's part of who you are. When I was growing up, it was a time when there was a lot of efforts to kind of transform the downtown. William Donald Schaefer obviously was part of that, but other city leaders, people like Walter Sondheim. I mean, it was a time when you had kind of a core of political leaders, business leaders of the city that came together around big plans. And one was to transform the Inner Harbor and turn it into this place that people would gather, where you have shops, you have merchants. It's really a community treasure.
And it's hard to envision that was a Disney thought back then, right? Like, when I see the pictures of young Governor Schaefer in 1975-6 breaking ground on all that grass, that was a hell of a vision. Well, and you had people to buy into it, too.
And vision's the right word, because you had visionaries like Jim Rouse, who could look at something that you and I would look at, and we'd be like, where do we start?
Literally.
And they would imagine, what can this be?
It's a drawing of a mouse.
And then once you have a vision, and you have a plan, you start to present that to people. Then you build support for it. So we had that going on when I was growing up in Baltimore, and it made you feel very hopeful about the city and proud about the city. Actually, there's kind of an effort going on right now in terms of the Middle Patapsco and the Middle Branch, and developing the shoreline. So you have a continuous sort of pathway that goes all the way along, and restoring the shoreline there, making sure that people are going to be able to kayak and bike and walk and everything else. And that is a really broad vision for the downtown area that's being talked about right now.
Yeah, we're actually going to talk to the folks at May and Reichel, who's one of the design firms.
Right,
very much involved in that. We're going to talk to them.
Very exciting.
What they're doing.
So so let's think about it this way. I grew up at a time when there were some big plans for Baltimore City, where you got city leaders to step up in a transformative way and execute on that plan.
And an incredible leader too, in Mayor Schaefer, right?
Yeah, and so right now, there could be some 8-year-old kid, 10-year-old kid who's living in Southwest or whatever, and these big plans are being put together. And that young person's going to grow up at a time when community's coming together with business and political leadership and community leadership in the city and making something great happen for Baltimore. That should be the storyline that you look back on if you're part of a city that's proud. And so, like I said, if you grow up here, it's in your blood. You believe it's the best city in the world. Nobody can tell you different. So
I'm aware.
How about the idea? How about the idea of giving back and public service? Was that part of just the way it was in the Sarbanes household?
Pretty much. I mean, obviously, my father was the the prime example of that. But my uncle, my father's brother, served in the military. He actually rose to be a 2-star general in the Army Reserves. Grew up in Salisbury, Maryland, like my dad did, and was an educator his whole life. Was principal of 3 different high schools in Wicomico County. And, I mean, I meet people every week who had my uncle as a teacher or principal in Wicomico County.
Legacy.
And so that idea that, you know, we have a lot of teachers in the family. My mother was a teacher. I got a lot of cousins who teach.
Well, the show's here because I met him my first day of high school. He was my high school guidance counselor.
Well, there you go. So you know what I'm talking about.
Education's important.
Exactly. But this idea that there's lots of different ways you can give back. You can step up into public service in terms of being in the public sector, and one form of that is elected office or appointed office. But you can also be a private citizen who's privately employed, but you decide that you're going to be a volunteer, and you know you're going to give back. Like Barbara Mikulski, who I think's been on your show, always talks about, you know, the people who do things on their own time and on their own dime. You know, they come out of pocket to help with some community effort, but they also come home after having worked a full day, and then they go volunteer for a couple hours.
Yeah, we're going to talk later today in another segment with some folks coming in who have stepped up on their own time, on their own dime, to clean up the neighborhood right around Faley's.
Yeah.
Those are the folks.
We're seeing a lot more of that lately where the news was always leading with the latest murder, the latest thing. Every day it comes to me, certainly, and I'm looking for it with Baltimore Positive, that there are such good people here doing such good things. And that's, 30 years of doing radio here where I talk about sports. And, you mentioned something in the first segment about Baltimore pride and talk about Bolton Hill. We talk about we're getting an oar. We're never going to let Baltimore. We feel that way about the football team, and we get that way on Sundays around here. We used to get that way 7 days a week, around all of this. And I'm starting to sense a little bit more of that as we go into election next year. We had Brandon Scott sitting right here 2 weeks ago. We've had Jack Young here. We know people are stepping up. That there is going to be a conversation that's going to be maybe louder than it was before Freddie Gray.
I think that's right, and telling those positive stories is really important for the city. So, I grew up, obviously, in a family that put public service as a high priority. And, I practiced law for 18 years before I got into public life. But all during that time, I did a lot of volunteer work. I worked with a group of community leaders in East Baltimore around Dunbar High School, trying to put together this whole partnership to help the kids in the neighborhood. Did that for years and years. Was on the board of the Public Justice Center, which does a lot of great stuff. It's like a public interest law firm here in Baltimore and Maryland. Was president of that board at one point. So a lot of community service, even as I was, at a private law firm here in Baltimore. But that idea that you give back. And then I did a kind of very unusual thing, which was I went part-time at my law firm. I went to 60%. I went and worked for 7 years for Nancy Grasmick at the State Department of Education.
Another one of our guests that's smarter than us, that has more degrees.
Terrific.
Everybody we have on is smarter than us.
I worked for I've worked for two Nancys who are amazing. Nancy Grasmick and now Nancy D'Alessandro
that's
Pelosi.
Sort of the jackpot, isn't it?
Exactly. And they're both amazing individuals. They finish the day stronger than most people start the day, even though they get up at 5 a.m. In the morning.
Is that something we should know about Nancy right now, Pelosi? I mean, because we haven't had her on. Maybe there's a rumor that I'm going to.
The energy level there is unbelievable. And just like Nancy Grasmick, there are people who go through your day, and they get more energy from people as they meet them. So by the end of the day, they're still going.
It's kind of weird like that.
And that's, I think, why they're such powerful leaders.
And both of them always appear, and I'm always in awe of folks who do this. They always appear to be 2 or 3 moves ahead. 2 or 3 moves ahead.
And completely unflappable. Like there's nothing you're going to do that are going to rile them because they have an inner strength. And actually, again, I'll tie anything back to Baltimore that I can, but I feel like the core strength that Nancy Pelosi comes is from that D'Alessandro family and that upbringing here in Baltimore, which was about giving back. It was about public service. And you see that translated every single day. So, so in the back of my mind, did I think maybe at some point I would get into public life in a more official way? Yeah, it was kind of out there. I didn't want to sort of overreach for that because I felt like you should only do that if it makes sense. And so I put a lot of time into other things and trying to make a difference. But then when the opportunity came, you know, I thought, look, this may not come again. It's a chance for me to pull together all my work in the public sector, the private sector, the nonprofit sector into one very interesting job that can make a difference. And based on looking at it that way, I thought, you know, let me take a shot at this. And
the voters,
I was lucky enough that people responded to that. Yeah.
Jumping back, I mean, I actually mentioned to Nestor walking in today, I said, you know what, the congressman was 12 years old in 1974 when his dad was the lead prosecutor, per se, lead investigator. I mean, I remember as a young man just watching, glued to my TV like everyone else.
I think Dad wasn't home a lot that summer.
He wasn't. Right. And when he was home, he was holed up in his study looking through transcripts of things. In fact, I remember.
What's your that's what I was going to ask you. What's your recollection of that summer and your dad being on every TV show that was to be on and really carrying the case, carrying the water during Watergate?
Well, of course, it was a different time in terms of how media worked because you didn't have all these different ways of getting information. So people had to tune in, watch these hearings. And it wasn't just getting a 30-second impression of the players. You know, people watch for a long time. And I think that's how my father's reputation for being very measured and focused and thoughtful in how he approaches the job, that's how he got that, because they could kind of see how he was handling things. Peter Radina, who was chairman of the Judiciary Committee, asked my father if he would introduce the first article of impeachment, which, you know, is kind of an intimidating assignment to get, but he stepped. He stepped.
As we're finding out this week.
Right. So he stepped up into that, and obviously that was a very sobering undertaking, as is this inquiry that we're embarked on right now. But I remember, as you say, I remember watching television, seeing my father there, and then him coming home with, you know, these huge briefcases and litigation bags of documents, transcripts, and other things.
It wasn't on his Apple then.
No. I mean, and in fact, in the front hall on a radiator, I have an image in my mind of these just, you know, when the Nixon Watergate tapes were finally turned over, and there were transcripts of them. I mean, binders and binders. And I remember he had those binders like 3 high across this radiator in the front hall, and he was just working his way through them. So to live it that close and personal, what was an incredible historical moment for our country, definitely was formative for me. It reinforced to me how important our democratic institutions are and how potentially fragile they are if somebody like the president at that time is willing to undermine them. And that's why we feel so strongly now that we have to do what we can to protect the public trust, to protect our institutions, to keep our democracy strong and resilient, particularly at a time, frankly, when these foreign actors are trying to get in and mess around with our democracy. And the fact is, if we don't have trust in our own institutions, it's easier for us to be attacked from outside. It's like if you have a compromised immune system, it's easier for you to get an infection. And I think one of the challenges, and this has been my crusade in Congress, is to reform our democracy, make sure voting works better in America, that we have ethics and transparency, we have campaign finance reform, so that we have more confidence in our own democracy. Because if we do, it will be more resilient. It'll be harder for it to be attacked. But if we're cynical about our own government and our own politics, then that's like an infection, and people can get in here and mess around like they did in 2016.
Well, if there's anything the Russians have done is sow discord, right? I mean,
that's exactly right.
When the President of the United States is on Twitter, as he was last night, basically inciting things that I can't believe they allow him to have a Twitter account. But as we sit here and say that we're in a news cycle here that by the time anybody watches this, who knows where we are. And you do have some experience in your own household with this, right?
Yeah, basically, you got to stand up for the democracy. When you see it at risk, you got to do the right thing. And I think there's a lot of Americans who feel that way. And as we pursue this inquiry right now, this impeachment inquiry, it's a very sober thing. I mean, nobody's doing this with a smile on their face. Right. This is serious stuff.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I pulled a quote from your dad, and in one of his quotes back then in 1974 was, "This is a grave and sobering situation." Yeah. He was not celebrating. He was saying repeatedly, when I pulled up quotes from Congressman Paul Sarbanes at that time, that we have to go slow. Let's get the facts.
Yeah.
Let's be a fair arbiter of this. But this is a sobering, and you just used that same word, sobering.
The public expects us, if we are brought to a moment like this, to exercise our constitutional responsibility in a measured and respectful way. Not make it political, not make it a food fight. And this episode where our president, talking to a foreign leader, instead of thinking about what's in the national interest of the United States, what's in the national security of the United States, decides, hey, this is a good opportunity for me to lean on some guy to go manufacture dirt on a political opponent. I mean, that's outrageous. That's not how our president should behave when he's dealing with foreign leaders. And I think that's why the public is saying, you know what, you do need to get to the bottom of this. Now, I'm not prejudging anything. I don't know where it's going to land.
Well, there was an admission of guilt, just a little part of that.
I think that may be what's different this time. We can talk a little bit about what the move in the polls over the last week or so. But I just thought yesterday, just for giggles, I went, this is the entire whistleblower report and the transcript of the call from the White House. The interesting thing to me, Congressman, is that the White House now is trying to have people believe that this call doesn't say what it is. I keep saying to folks,
well, we've done that with the Mueller report.
Don't argue with, but this is easier.
We did it with a hurricane map.
This is easier than Mueller.
But you see, we live in a time when somebody can be standing in front of a table with a black tablecloth like this and tell you with a straight face that it's a blue tablecloth or a green tablecloth.
Right, and it will get legs.
And, yeah, this is the thing. And unfortunately, people are bombarded with so much information and misinformation every day. And I understand this, that almost to kind of survive, they go, you know what, I don't know what the real truth is here. So I'm just going to kind of put it over there. And I think we've had some leaders, and I think, Trump is one of them, who takes advantage of that. And they sort of create this idea of, well, everyone's the same. You don't know who to trust, all that kind of stuff. And the average person,
Bidens might have done something.
Whatever. They throw sand in everybody's eyes. And so then people are kind of like, I don't know what to believe. That's why it's important for us to really stick to the facts here, which is what we're doing. You look at the subpoenas that are being issued, the requests for interviews and depositions. It's all about, hey, there was this phone call. A lot of people apparently knew it was happening and listened in on it.
Please read it. You can go print it out.
We need to talk to those people. We need to pursue the concerns raised by this whistleblower, who by all accounts seems to be a very professional person. You want to protect people like that.
Whistleblower's someone that's protecting the law, making sure people aren't.
Well, and even Chuck Grassley, Republican senator from Iowa, who's had a hand in writing a lot of the whistleblower statutes and offering those protections. He said, you know, you don't go after whistleblowers or doing the responsible thing. You know, you got to look at what they've raised and make sure that you've, you know, uncovered the evidence behind it and so forth. But it's a patriotic thing. If you see something wrong happening inside the government, you need to step up.
We ask every citizen to report a crime. If we
see
saw
something,
a crime
say
right
something.
Here,
See something, say something.
Right?
Well,
step up.
It's so interesting. I happened to hear on the way in today, driving in, that last night on Sean Hannity, it goes back to what you're talking about, to throw sand in the eyes. Geraldo Rivera actually said, and I was thinking about your dad again, said to Sean Hannity, it's a shame that there was no you back in Watergate, because had Richard Nixon had you the way Trump has you, he wouldn't have been impeached. And I thought, there's a total disregard for democracy. And the truth, Geraldo's saying, if only Nixon had had a Fox News, we wouldn't have had a president step aside. Now, Nixon himself obviously stepped aside before the impeachment.
When the real observation should be, it's a shame that there's a Sean Hannity now.
Right.
Not that there wasn't one then. You know, because you get people that create these false counter narratives, and they kind of lean on the cynicism out there in the public and exploit it. And this is a combination exercise. One is, if the law has been broken, and frankly, just what the president himself has admitted is a violation of campaign law, you cannot solicit a foreign national to provide a thing of value, which is exactly what he was asking him to do, in connection with a U.S. federal election. Not allowed. That's a violation of law.
And using money you appropriated
that's another dimension.
To help another country.
But even just the stuff that the president has conceded is itself a violation of campaign finance
it's pretty
law.
straightforward, Congressman.
You know.
Again, you can read it. I would like you to do us a favor, though.
I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist.
Master, you went to Dundalk High School. What does that say? I would
in my neighborhood, there were people that
people understood what that meant.
Yeah, people understood what that meant. I'm from Dundalk.
So here's the thing: we got to both deal with the threats coming at our democracy, whether they're coming from the inside and the outside. That's one project. But the other project is we do have to get back to where we're strengthening the overall institutions and the democracy in this country. And the fact of the matter is, it's still too hard to register and vote in America, which is ridiculous. I mean, it's been 50 years since John Lewis tried marching across the Pettus Bridge.
180,000 voters in Ohio thrown out the other day.
I'll tell you what, I don't want to. We're coming up on a break. I don't want to give this short shrift.
Because we want to get into his district.
Well,
I got a picture of your district.
But I also want the congressman to talk about his fight for making voting easier, campaign finance.
Let's do
those
that.
things you're passionate about.
Let's
come back segment 3 and let him do that.
We're at Fadley's. We're at Lexington Market. We're doing Baltimore Positive. Don Moeller, Congressman John Sarbanes are back for more on WNST, AM 1570 Towson, Baltimore, where we never stop talking. Baltimore Positive.
That's a